I don't know if evening, morning to you, evening to me, and late night for Tony and all the Australian down under, midday for European. We are very glad to see such a wonderful response of people joining this. This is like our introduction of the new special interest group, Leisure and Human Rights. In a way, you know, Tony and me have been together on this issue for quite a while, boiling things up. And the reason for us to do it is, of course, to launch it formally, but also to get your views. We would like to hear your voices. So we know to what extent our direction is applicable, to what extent you wish to get involved, etc., etc. So it's a very much an open, democratic kind of session. And just to start to kick up the ball, what I will do, I will just give a short presentation for those of you that maybe did not have the time to read or were not involved in the part of what we have been going through. So I will just share the screen. Okay, here we go. Yeah, can everybody see that? I suspect, yes. Okay, all right, so this is the launch of our special SIG and also some research invitation and open house for any other views that you have. What we're going to do today, it's not a formal kind of things, but I do want to tell you the outline so you know what to expect. A little bit, very little bit about the background and goals of this special interest group, some present activities and future activities, and the main thing would be the project on leisure rights, holding nation states to account, and Tony will take the lead in that direction. And of course, we will leave some time for discussion, questions. We may not have all the answers, so I don't call it Q&A, but an open discussion, so as to fertilize the issue and see how we can go ahead with that. So a little bit of the background. We all know that leisure is human right. All of you are probably have connection or involved in the leisure field in one way or another. It has been declared already long time ago in the UDRHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we further emphasize that under the World Leisure Organization's Charter for Leisure, that has been revised recently under the leadership of the World Leisure Academy. And we had a task force and we went back and forth, consultations, and got the view. Thank you for those of you that have been you know, sharing the views, and we try to do it really internationally so people would draw on their own contextual, socio-cultural context and add into the charter in a way that will be more relevant and authentic to everybody. This is the website of the charter. Those of you that maybe did not have the chance to do it, just go and read and see all the material. During the process of revising this important document, the Charter for Leisure, we actually realized that the leisure rights have been generally neglected by governments and policy makers, practitioners, researchers, etc. Not so many people have been, even within the leisure field, have been discussing that, deliberating, and to say the least, publishing that issue. So that led us to establish this special interest group with the intention to really spend more time on that, not just theoretically, but also practically and in terms of research worldwide. The goals of our special interest group is to promote research and teaching on the topic of human rights and leisure, basically based on the Charter for Leisure, the principle. There are a list of principles there that were very carefully revised. As Tony said in one of those revisions, it feels like he's writing a thesis and somebody is making another, reviewing and then return back, another review, return back. So that's why it took 2 years, because we do want to make it inclusive. And also not just to stay as a piece of paper or charter, but really going beyond that to enhance the issue of leisure rights in governments, in policymakers of leisure, of course, practitioners, leisure research, and all the way up to United Nations human rights system to see what people have been doing, if at all, and if they didn't, then what stands in the way for not doing that. We have certain present activities and future activities. There's not a really division there, but for the sake of presentation, I put it forward like that. We want to conduct research on leisure rights, development of online teaching and research materials. This is on the website I'm going to show in a minute. And of course, the project which Tony will present on leisure rights, holding nation states to account. The research agenda on leisure rights include those 6 points, but of course we are open to go more than that. It's just the beginning of a journey, and I hope all of you will join us. First of all, those members that rectify the things, well, to report what they have been doing so far, if at all. There are so many countries that have been nations that have been notifying that, but how does it translate into actions? And on the other side is that those that did not ratify that, then what's the reason of not doing that, and what are the implications? Leisure rights in national human rights arrangement, how is it manifested there? About leisure-related discrimination cases as well. And of course, the abuse and exploitations of children and maybe other people in leisure context. And also to what extent leisure is manifested in measurements and also indexing frameworks and things like that. So this is just a point form, and each one of them could go on to be a kind of collaborative research agenda that we would like to basically do it worldwide, region-wise, etc. The second one is developing online teaching and research material. Basically, this is a snapshot of the website. And thank you for the great job of the World Leisure Secretariat, Maria and Christina, our leaders here, to put all these things there. And apart from describing the charter and presenting that, there's also 6 items on the agenda which relates to material for government, and also some educational material, and the bibliography, and of course, additional in the process of the development of that. The idea is that even during the 2 years, 2018 to 20, we left it open so as to get the public views, like consultation. And now we want to have more input to further develop that material so it will be more dynamic, rather than, as I said before, a piece of paper. Now it's not a piece of paper, but it's online that students just make reference to that. I read some of those theses, but then what? We want to go further. And the third one, which is the project on leisure rights, Tony will talk a few minutes after my presentation of the future activities. What we aim to go to do when we are forward looking is to promote the Charter for Leisure. We already had a webinar and several papers on that. We already got a planned and approved session in the coming World Leisure Congress in New Zealand. We sent them a proposal, we got some review, we changed it, and then it was approved. So those of you that planning to go down under to Dunedin, which I heard is a beautiful place, please join us for this session. And there may be more than one. This planned session may include some of the material that Tony will present and beyond. We also want to encourage a research paper on disciplinary aspects of leisure rights and review and evaluate discriminatory practices and leisure activities. And I just see some students joining in now. I just let at least one of them in. So here you are, giving you some ideas for papers, writing your thesis or whatever it is. So this is our future activities. And now we go to the project on leisure rights, holding nation states to account. And I'm honored to ask Tony to share more. Tony?
Thank you, Atara. Well, we're not presenting this on a PowerPoint. I'm just going to read my notes, make it short if I can, and informal. And you can imagine that we're setting this up at a conference and we're all in a bar and sitting around in a circle and having a chat about this new idea.
Maybe I stop sharing so we can see each other's face.
Yes. Okay.
Good.
Right. So I'm going to keep it short, keep it informal, and hope we've got time, well, plenty of time for discussion at the end. So the project, we've called it Holding Governments to Account in relation to leisure rights. It probably could do with a snappier title at some stage in the future, but we'll maybe get to that. The first point I'd like to make is that this project is just one project. It's not the project, it's a project. But it's one which occurred to us arising out of the work on the Charter, and it's one which we think has the possibility to involve a maximum number of members of the group and beyond. So it's just been put forward. I've made a sort of start on it, but it really requires people to join in order to make it work in full. So back to first principles, as Atara's the point which we always come back to, which is that the idea of leisure rights goes back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but that 1948, which actually designated leisure time and cultural participation, culture and leisure participation as human rights. Now, the Universal Declaration is a statement of principle, and all member states have endorsed that, but that's all it is. But in the 60s and 70s, and this is certainly something I learned that I think a lot of my colleagues learned in the Charter review process, and that is that this is followed up in the 1960s and 70s by international covenants, one for civil and political rights and one for economic, social and cultural rights. So the covenant on economic, social and cultural rights is the one that we come under in the main. And the point about these covenants is that they are treaties, not just statements of principles, they are treaties in international law. This means that countries sign up to them, as it were. They sign and they ratify, and their state, their government, their national legislatures ratify the treaty. So it has the same status in the United Nations as, for instance, the climate change treaty. And that's all played out in the public realm and in the media. But behind high-profile treaties like that are dozens of UN treaties, of which the economic, social, and cultural rights one is one, and countries, states who have ratified these should be held to account on, once they've signed up to something, are they fulfilling what they've signed up to? Like as with the climate change, as with the nuclear non-proliferation treaty and so on, but also economic, social, and cultural rights. So states can be assessed and held to account for their performance against the criteria of the covenant. Now, we see in our newspapers and so on the holding of governments to account through like the COP congresses in the case of the climate change treaty. And we have organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International that make their own reports, and these are covered in the media. But all these treaties have systems of accountability and holding to account, mostly done via UN committee systems. And what's interesting about these systems is that each committee and treaty has their own approach, but they're sort of pretty similar. That they are governments that have ratified the treaty are required to report periodically on their performance according to set criteria. And in the case of the economic, social, and cultural rights, a country produces its report on a schedule and submits it to the United Nations. The United Nations Committee usually sends back some comments, requests for information, raises issues, and the government responds to those comments and requests for more information and issues and so on. They then typically have a face-to-face meeting at the UN headquarters in New York or Geneva, and a discussion on the report. And after that, the committee produces its concluding observations, assessing the state of performance, and often with suggestions for the way they should do better next time in the next reporting round, which is usually about 5 years away. Now, the countries that have signed up early on in the process have gone through about 5 of these cycles, 5 or 6. Now, all these reports, the raising of issues, the response to the issues, the concluding observations, are all available online in PDF and Word, and mostly translated into the UN languages. So it's an enormous trove of information. In the case of the country where I'm at the moment, Australia's about 5 or 6 report cycles. So it's 5 times 5, 25 reports. In some countries which are new countries, or they've only got round to ratifying the treaty late in the day and something, they might only have 2 or 3 report cycles. But that resource is there for 171 members of the United Nations who have ratified the international covenant. So it's a massive resource. And that's that's part of what we should focus on. Now, so we suggested, or came to the conclusion, I thought it would suggest that we should develop projects around that resource. And I started doing some work looking at it on an international basis, especially using the European Union, where there's a lot of other data, making international comparisons. But it seemed to us that it would also be possible to do individual projects on individual countries, given the depth of information that's there, but also given the fact that each country has its own human rights system. Often some countries have bills of rights, countries have constitutions, some of which mention cultural matters, for example, or sport or things like that. And they also have things like human rights commissions and so on, and legislation, anti-discrimination legislation, for example. So that is a resource which exists in every country, and obviously it varies enormously from country to country of how historical that is, how detailed it is, how elaborate it is. But often, and I've only just started investigating this in Australia, and finding that, of course, the legal academics in the countries write about this. They write articles in legal journals, and quite a lot of which is quite understandable. Some of it's in legal jargon, and it's not so easily understandable. But so there's a resource there, there's literature, and there's a tradition of debates and critiques and so on of the whole human rights system. And our job or our interest would be to say, well, how does culture fit into this, or cultural participation? Because that's the language used in the United Nations system, but it includes sport, recreation, the arts, and so on. How does culture fit into that national system? And then how does that in turn relate to the United Nations through the covenant? So that's the kind of model of the research. And as I said, I started working on Australia, and I'm finding it actually a surprisingly demanding thing. I didn't realize there was quite so much material available, but also quite fascinating. So the idea is that for the project would be that people would sign up for this project, one or more individuals from as many countries as we can, as are interested in being involved, that we would develop probably a model. It needn't be a strict set of regulations, as it were, but it'd be useful to have a kind of framework so that we might be having some common elements in the various case studies, as well as variations because of the background and the different issues that arise in different countries. So the idea would be to have case studies in individual countries taking place against the common framework, and each participant, of course, would help shape that common framework. And the outcome would be journal articles, conference special sessions, possibly special issues of journals on the whole thing, and possibly book chapters, and possibly some sort of presence on the WLA website, which will be a kind of publicly accessible form of perhaps shortened versions of studies. So that's the model in brief, and obviously I can answer any questions you have. Well, I won't be able to answer all questions necessarily, but I will attempt to answer as many questions as we can. One thing which cropped up, which I want to mention in the article which was done on cultural rights, was the link, the potential link, which has not been fully explored, but we think there's a lot of potential for the UN Sustainable Development Goals system, which is the successor to the Millennium Goals, that you'll recall, which came to an end and they're on to a new phase. So the Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 of them, and it's a massive program involving all nations, but obviously it's of special interest in developing countries. But it didn't do, I don't think, a very good job in relation to cultural development, if you like, the role of culture in general and specifically in cultural participation in development. And it's clear that UNESCO, which is, as you know, a UN agency, but it's sort of semi-independent, seemed to think the same, because they produced their own report, a mammoth report on 22 cultural indicators, and in a great deal of detail showing how these cultural indicators all link with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And it's clear that their ambition is that the cultural indicators should be part of the Sustainable Development Goals indicators as well, and be brought into that system. And there's a lot of work going on and case studies going on to do that. And I think we could become somehow, and WLO has consultative status with UN organizations. And so I hope that this group could provide a bridge between WLO and that UN program. So that's, I think, something quite interesting for the future. That's most of what I want to say specifically about the project, but I've got a couple of other points which would relate partly to the project and partly more generally to the group. The first is the question of funding, and it's worth making the point that all this work that started in 2017 or thereabouts, involving the World Leisure Academy, doing the charter review, and then the development of the web materials and the research articles and so on have been written afterwards. All this has been done on an entirely voluntary basis. We've had administrative support from the Secretariat, which has been appreciated, but the work has been 99% by academics working on a well, the way academics do, you know, just sort of. I mean, I've been able to spend quite a bit of time on it because I'm retired, and I've picked it up as an area of interest. But I haven't got a clue how Atara finds time to do all this, because up until recently, she was, apart from being head of department and with a teaching load, she was editor of the World Leisure Journal as well. But she's still held in there. But now she's no longer World Leisure Journal editor. She's got all this time on her hands, I find, and to be able to be doing an even more, making an even larger contribution as we go on. So with that as background, it makes sense for us to think about whether or not we can get some funding for this project and maybe for other projects in the group's area of interest. And we had some thoughts, but not very many, and we haven't got very far with it. But one idea is to develop the guidelines for the individual case study projects, to record the list of tasks which are involved with that, the sorts of data that's needed and is available to be collected, so that that could be turned into grant applications at the local level, you know, so that people might be able to use that to apply for research assistance or something like that, to help with the project. But hopefully we might be able to get some external funding. There's human rights commissions all over the world. There's the UN itself, there's UNESCO, and there's international human rights organizations, often with charitable funding and so on. So, but we've barely begun to look at that, but members of the group may well themselves have ideas. And it's particularly, it seemed to me, would be helpful if we can do this in regard to group members from developing countries. And the final point I wanted to make is Atara is very young, as you can see, but I'm quite old, and I have no idea about social media. But it seems to me that this sort of group lends itself to having some sort of social media system of communication. And so any potential member that feels they have skills in this area and could help with this, or access to resources which would help with this, and could see a way into setting something up either around the project or around the group as a whole, then we will be interested to hear from you. So that's it, Atara. Should we go to questions, or have you got some few more remarks?
Sure. So thanks for the compliment. I'm not that young, but I'll
You look young.
Okay, thank you. But I do go along with the trend of social media and all this kind of stuff, because that's the way people are connecting today, and COVID-19 add more momentum to this type of connection. So this is to say that if we do have this type of international collaborative project, we can definitely continue these meetings online, either small groups or bigger one, brainstorming and everything. And I think I really want to commend the Secretariat, Mireia, and of course Christina and all the others for helping us to set it through. Talking about funding, I'm still a member of the board, and I do know that there is a little fund there for knowledge transfer that we can apply on small grants. So I think it's not a big amount, but at least a startup to go into that. This is within, before going to external grant, I think we can utilize it within the World Leisure Organization family, I would say. But then for that, we need to have this framework to go to establish the framework and see the interest of people. I just a side matter, maybe to prompt some more discussion in view. I'm volunteering for many years on several NGOs in Hong Kong on education for social inclusion. For example, the latest project I've done was bringing people with and without special needs together through some recreation activities, and showing how it changed the stereotype and bring more people together. Hong Kong has been is one of the places that ratified the human rights, but when it comes to implementation, there's still a lot to do. Quite a number of special needs students are still in special schools, and even though there is an integration system, but they are excluded. And the only way for them to interact is outside school, where we have this bringing together people, typical and special education needs, in recreation and extended education out of school, which is leisure. So this is also some of those ideas that I want to throw out to you, that it's more on the practical level rather than of visiting the ratification on the government. So we offer you different layers, all the way from the top, the government, down to NGOs, to activities, to practical demonstration of human rights in relation to leisure. So this is just to show the practical side as well. And I would like to open the floor to whoever wants to say something. I will not accept silent. I told Tony in our rehearsal that silent, it's not good. So whatever you like to say, we would like to hear. And if you have any questions, if we can answer, of course we will. So those of you that are shy, so-called, you can put your comments on the chat and I will read it out loud. Yeah, anyone?
Well, I can ask a question of one of our members. I put it that way, do it that way around. Carla, being from the USA, did you know, and are you interested in the fact that the United Nations, the United States, is one of only 2 major countries that hasn't ratified the International Covenant of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights? Which is, I think, an interesting phenomenon of how countries engage or do not engage with this field. Sorry to put you on the spot.
don't get me started with what the United States has been doing a lot of things lately.
Yes.
It's rather disconcerting. I think, you know, again, sometimes there's a feeling that we've got our own approach, and it's not an international.
Yeah.
Very, again, in my opinion, not right. That's a wrong way of looking at it. You know, as you're talking about this, I mean, certainly I think that many people would agree with the need to, you know, ratify these things and so on, but it's a very, you know, cumbersome process. And I fear now that there's other issues that come before that. And I'm not really answering your question, I know, but I think well, there's just lots of work to be done. And, you know, I think John Datilla's on this conversation too from the US, and there may be others that I just don't know.
Well, I've looked at this a little bit because we have not the same, but some similar problems in Australia, and especially in the federal system. And this is why it does get interesting when you start looking at this, because in Australia, the problem becomes where we have states in Australia. It's federal, like the United States, and the government, the federal government didn't create the states. The states were there first, and so the powers of the federal government are enshrined in the Constitution, and so it's often able to say, that's not our responsibility, that's the state's responsibility. And then the states can say, well, you know, we're not a party to this treaty, we're not interested. You're toing and froing. So that's one issue. The other issue is, which I think it applies in America, it's called, you know, they refer to it as exceptionalism, where you say, well, other countries need to do this, but we don't, because we have a Bill of Rights and a constitution which takes care of all this, which is, I think, what you're referring to. And the other thing I know is that the United States is also that one of the most popular of these human rights treaties, I believe, is the International Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I think the United States is again exceptional in not, you know, that's got about 190 signatories or ratified. And so the question is why? And it turns out that, of course, it has to be ratified by the Senate. And there are senators who look at the Rights of the Child Covenant or Convention and find that the child, bearing in mind that the covenant, the United Nations refers to children as up to the age of 18 or up to 17, and adults from 18 onwards. So the covenant says, the convention says that children have the rights to choose a religion. And the certain religious groups say, no, they don't. And so they object to the whole thing because of that one clause. So that's why I find the whole thing quite, you know, it's a whole hidden world there, which I didn't know about. And so it's less fraught in most of the economic, social, and cultural areas, but it's still got its difficulties and its problems, but mostly not because of the importance of the issue, like children's rights and so on, but often just from neglect. You know, no one's interested in the cultural bit of the convention. It's the last, on the economic, social, and cultural rights, it's the last article in the convention. And it's the last article in the reports. And it's the one that they finish off with 2 or 3 lines at the end. It's like that in a lot of cases. So that's what one is faced with.
So we got some comments of people that are thanking us, but I also hear from Makaya. Hello, Makaya. We met in Turkey a while ago. And maybe you can share something about South Africa, because you said you're looking forward to, especially the principle of getting government to account. Makaya, anything you want to add?
I think this is the second session that I'm attending. So my videos of I'll turn it on in just a moment. But yeah, I think it's quite interesting, honestly speaking, because I mean, there's so many policies that have been developed over the years, and from especially on the marginalized groups, specifically around people with disabilities. And for me, come to think of it, none of them have actually been implemented per se. We reference them quite oftenly, but then when it comes to the actual stakeholders taking accountability of the same policies that have been drafted, it's often you can taken from pillar to post, and there's often no follow-up about the implications and thereof. So I think it would be something quite useful to actually start knocking on these doors to say that, hey, but this and this implies this and that. So why isn't the action being taken? And I think this would be the right step into getting that being done. So yeah, I'm actually quite interested and excited about this venture.
Yes, can I give a quick response to that? And thanks for those remarks. I mean, one of the interesting things is that South Africa is one of the few countries that actually mentions sport participation as a human right in its constitution.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the other ones is represented here as well, which is Brazil. But that's quite rare. But the point I was going to make, which you also raised, is this whole business of implementation, because I have a colleague at UTS who works in the disability area, and we have a Disabilities Act in Australia, and there's a procedure, as with all the discrimination acts that we have. There's a Human Rights Commission, and if you feel you've been discriminated against under the terms of the Act, you can take a complaint to the Human Rights Commission. And it doesn't have legal powers, but it has the power to call people in to mediate, to see whether it can be corrected. And if the organization that is found to be discriminating and is not willing to respond constructively, then the complainant who's been discriminated against can take the matter to court. So there's a complaint procedure, which of course generates reports and cases and so on. And my colleague Simon Darcy has actually researched those cases, which again are all in the law books, and you can look them up all online these days. You can look them up. And he concentrated on disability and people who are discriminated against in terms of access to cultural facilities. So, when new theatres are built or refurbished, they have to install wheelchair access, lifts and ramps and so on. And the regulations are all there, following the human rights laws and and it's all in the building code. And yet private companies still ignore all this, and local councils, they ignore the very regulations and laws that are already in place. And so you get this case law of people appealing in the courts and saying, why aren't you doing this? This is being legislated. So that's another area of research, where this sort of system exists, which can be investigated.
Oh, so in a way, if I can frame it, there's this top-down way or bottom-up. So what Makaya is shared is more about the actual discrimination against people with disabilities, and we can look at the practices and then refer that to the World Leisure, the Charter for Leisure. And another way is to actually look at the governments and see what's happening there and see, is it just lip service? And if it's not there at all, so what it is. So since you mentioned Brazil, and since I know Antonio for more than 2 decades, Antonio, can I invite you to say something? I want to hear your voice.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see you again and all our friends. Yes, as Tony mentioned, Brazil, for instance, we have in our constitution as the right of the citizens and also the duty of the state to provide leisure. And this is followed by 27 states and also 5,570 municipalities in the country. But one thing is the written statement, and another thing is how it is completed. But I am here more as a board member, I should say, although I'm interested in this area, but there are so many other people in my country, in university, that writes about this issue, and I'm here to spread the word to these groups, leisure studies, leisure research groups in this area. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonio. Yeah, that's good. We are only, it's only a core group of 20-something people, but of course we would like to disseminate it more and maybe have more webinar or exchange sessions in order to see who wants to join and how and to what extent.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And again, if I could give a comment to Antonio's comments, one of the issues which is raised, of course, is the issue of cost. And this is one of the arguments against economic, cultural, and social rights generally, because they're to do with housing, education, food, and so on, social security, those things, as well as cultural, leisure, and working conditions, and so on. And they're different from the civil and political rights, which are all about your treatment before the law, your right to vote, and all those sorts of legal and civil and political and civil things. Now, the problem with economic, social, and cultural rights is that, and we have a case at the moment in Australia where the one of the conflicts which I mentioned earlier, the Committee Against Torture is visiting Australia as a routine thing. They've done a report, a committee visits and needs to be able to visit places of detention, prisons, and the states are not willing for them to visit, a couple of states, because they want to visit, unannounced and not pre-booked and so on, and it's caused all sorts of eruptions. So and the reason for this, they say, is, well, it's the federal government that has entered into this treaty, which includes supervision of, standards in prisons. But what if the committee makes recommendations which will cost money? Who's going to pay? And the federal government should pay, but it's not the federal government's job to provide prisons, it's the state's job to provide prisons. And so it comes down to money. Now, so one could say, therefore, we shouldn't bother with this, because especially in developing countries, there's no excuse in Australia, but in developing countries, they say, well, they don't have the resources to meet the standards of developed countries because of the cost for all these things. And the response to that is twofold, to my mind anyway. One is that if we don't raise this flag and say this is important, then it will never be seen as important. And we all know that cultural matters are important, even for people who don't have a lot of money. Sometimes they're even more important. People who don't have a lot of resources. So that's one thing. And the other is, if you look at the 3 articles that I've done on time, sport, and culture, the suggestion in that, which is cross-national, is that you should band countries into income groups, and you should assess their performance within an income band. So highly developed, the richer countries are measured against each other, and the poorer countries or middle countries are measured against each other, and so on. So they should be performing at a certain level, or a higher performing countries demonstrate what can be done at that income level. So there's a case for making a case that cultural matters, recreational matters, sport, culture, the arts are important, and that resources should be found. Obviously, and the other issue is that the treaties often make the point that some of these things should be achieved through international cooperation and assistance. So that's another thing. If you don't study the issue, how can you seek resources if you don't know that there's a problem?
Would anybody from a different context, different side of the world that would like to share? If not for this, maybe on, please, Neo, please.
Oh, hello, everybody. I'm Fumio Moroka, Japan Society of Leisure and Recreation Studies. I'm also a WLO lifetime member. So I translated World Leisure Charter for Leisure into Japanese, and now so all Japanese can read Charter for Leisure in Japanese on our society website. So I'm strongly support your project, especially research project. So could you tell me the more detail about the item, research item, and also deadline to submit the report from all countries?
Happily. I'll refer your first remark to Christina here, who might be interested in contacting you to have a copy of that translation to go on to the World Leisure Organization.
I already submitted translated Japanese edition to WLO, but right now only 6 languages on the website. Please add the Japanese edition also.
I hadn't checked that. Well, the project, first of all, I don't think there'll ever be any deadline, because this might take years for there's 190 UN member states, so maybe take a few years for them all to be done. So I don't think we'll put deadlines on it. Now how in terms of the detail, there's some detail on the website. I'd be happy. Well, I think I'm on the point of being able to provide some information, probably within the next couple of weeks, which I'd be happy to circulate, on a draft, if you like, of the way I've approached the project for the case study of Australia, i.e. the list of data I've collected, types of data I've collected, and maybe I'm writing an article, paper on it, but I could give the headings, and so the structure of what I've done, and we could maybe discuss that, by email on whether, because it'd be useful to know whether that very early draft based on one country would be easy to apply to another country, or whether it would be difficult, or it's possible that different countries have totally additional new ideas, additional items to add to the list of data sources or types of data or issues. So yeah, so I maybe within a couple of weeks I could circulate something if to anyone that's interested, and make an announcement on the website that this is possible.
Yeah, if available, please show us the research item, common research item.
Yes.
To
yes.
us. So it should be helpful.
Yes.
To do research. So Japan, we have a Congress of Regional Recreation Studies next month. So we will discuss about this project, and we're gonna make a research group in our society to start. So research.
Okay. Well, I'll make sure.
Item.
Make sure I get that information. I mean, I'm not in a position to specify that this is the set of rules or anything. It's just my experience.
For example. So,
yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good. So, well, any other points? So I think holistically we can look at that also with all the other activities that we're doing, not necessarily the government, as I said, but also others. And I know that people are involved in the field already as practitioners, and some of them would love to get a little bit more. So we can, as Antonio suggested, I mean, if some of you see yourself as a advocate for that, then maybe you can go back to your society or practice or the academia or whatever, and try to disseminate these words. And I want just to share the screen a little bit, just to we pass the discussion, just to see. This is the URL for the Leisure and Human Rights. And those of you that wish to, as Tony said, those are the youngest of those that are using the technology can scan this QR code to indicate your interest in joining the activities. Now, it's not a commitment. We just want to see whether you want to continue to be connected. And we will continue to share with you as we go along with that. Just use your camera and look at that, and then you fill the information. The information will go to the secretariat, and then they will help us to create another core group. And of course, I'm very happy, both of us are happy that you can give this QR code to other people, or if nobody has the QR code, just go to this URL website, and our email address, Tony and mine, are there, and we are very happy to get some any messages, questions, etc. Or some people don't like to talk in public, but maybe they have a flash at night and would like to share with us later on. So that would be great to have as many people as possible. So I will leave it on for a few minutes, and so you can all take pictures, and if it seems to work, that's okay. And if not, just go to this URL and see the email of Tony and me, and you can send us the information.
Thank you.
All right. Good. So thank you very much. I will stop sharing so I can see your face. Thank you very much for joining. In some of you are early morning, some late at night, some is a siesta time. We welcome everybody, and I would love to stay in touch. Send us an email or anything that you wish to say, and we will keep you updated anyway. We also update the website from time to time with additional stuff, and I would really invite you also to look at the charter and see the other information there. If you have any questions or any more resource or some other things that could be added, please send us so we can update. It is not, we are not the owners of that. We are only the facilitators. So you, all of us are the owners of this. And I think since we believe that leisure is a human right, we should practice it as well. Okay, so
Okay.
Thank you very much. And
Thank you,
Maria,
everybody.
anything we need to, Maria, is there anything we need to do before we say goodbye? No. Okay, so
No, that's all.
that's all. So, and this has been also recorded. I think we have no problem that people will get a copy if it's okay with you, just if they miss it, and the more the merrier. And again, thank you very much, and hope to see you soon. I never say goodbye, I always say see you later. So see you later. Thank you.
See you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye.